how are things being changed? Who'd like to dive in with this one and perhaps look at how they have used it or where they think social media streaming could be applicable?
Yeah, if you don't mind, guys, I'll jump in first. So
Ian, please do.
Thank you very much. My company, by the way, we manage social media on behalf of events, so we do things like training and strategy planning for them, and as well as fully managing their social media. So we're kind of lucky that we get this holistic view across events from all over the world and how they work, and we sort of kind of take the best bits, because we never do anything wrong, of course, and we get all the best bits and we share that knowledge. And one of those things that's quite topical while we're discussing it today is about how the tech giants are actually changing. Yes, they're kind of almost kind of arrogant in their approach when you want something from them. They're very dictatorial. They will sort of kind of, we're rolling this out and we're doing this and we're pushing this down, and you kind of have to adapt your event around what's available out there for the tools that are available. But essentially, I mean, if you look at the big four, I suppose, if we're looking at the big social media events like social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube, they are beginning to understand by pure definition that events and conferences are a collection of like-minded individuals who come together to share knowledge. And social media, by its definition, is a group of like-minded individuals who come together and share knowledge. And so those two things go really hand in glove. And they're beginning to understand how to sort of orchestrate and bring together technology in their platforms to make it more dynamic within the social media spectrum in your events. And I think we're going to talk a little bit later about all the different details of that, but they are actually beginning to pay attention and move in that direction, which is really good news.
Nick, you perhaps come at it from maybe a slightly different angle. Ian mentioned meetings, conferences and things, but when we're talking about it perhaps in an outdoor setting, an outdoor greenfield events, have we already seen good examples of how those platforms have already shaped what the audience behaviour is like?
I think one of the things we're concerned about, and we deliver about 30 to 40 festivals a season, hence the reason I look so old today, but it is that there's IP to protect. Unlike conferencing and some experiential campaigns, people are obsessed about reach. Brands are obsessed about getting reach, so everyone talks about hybrid events, so not just the activity or the activation happening, it's the bigger audience. So example being today, there'll be a massive reach happening externally to this room, whereas in festivals, there's lots of reasons, to protect that IP. So obviously one is bands and agents. You can't just start streaming their sets. You can with massive negotiated costs. And then in addition to that, it's protecting the experience. The danger being is if we keep going down this route of streaming everything, the content, and Glastonbury is a great example of this. So with the BBC, there's a whole experience that sits outside Glastonbury. Glastonbury being the engine that it is, can already sustain that ticket volume, whereas some of the other festivals, when you start streaming externally at the quality the BBC are doing, for example, on the red button, it could potentially start affecting commercial sales. It's not only the door revenue, there's all the sponsorship revenue, and that's driven on footfall, bar sales. These are all absolutely essential to the success of a festival industry. Streaming something through Periscope delivers no revenue currently. I'm sure it will do through advertising channels potentially later, but to the festival organizer and promoter. So there is this, and they are building in things like latency. I've seen that on conferencing platforms as well, where they'll have speakers and there's a latency built in, so you can't actually activate that content until later on, which hopefully then doesn't stem audience from attending those events.
Let's bring it across the other side of the table today and bring in Madeline and John. John, when you look at the social media platforms that people have been engaging with now for a number of years, really, people are all are very much familiar with them. How has the live streaming element changed what you guys are doing at GES?
It's an interesting question, actually, in terms of the idea of live streaming. Traditionally, in a B2B, we deliver 7,000 events in 42 countries every year. Traditionally, when we're looking at a live streaming, it's about that conference speaker slot environment. So it's very much a controlled environment. A lot of our clients are quite nervous of user-generated content around that in a live environment because you're looking at lack of brand control. We work in some sectors like healthcare and...
Just come right on top of that mic.
Okay, is that better?
That's perfect.
So we work in sectors like healthcare, defence, financial services, where actually a lot of the information that's exchanged within that environment is confidential. And there's lots of issues around that. So it tends to be very focused around specific elements of it, not a lot of user-generated content. When you get outside of those, it's an interesting, on a more general point, is this idea of content as the modern landfill. Is actually, there's lots and lots and lots out there. So you're asking your audience to engage, but by the same token, actually, not all of it's great. So what does that do to your brand in a more general sense?
Absolutely. Madeline, I don't know if you've got a view on this next one. And correct, if anybody in the audience wants to correct me, feel free. But I'm sure it was the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight in Las Vegas, or certainly in the USA, that generated massive pay-per-view figures for people paying to watch the match. But then some guy stood up in the audience with his phone and on Periscope just stuck the fight live on Periscope. Is there a danger when we look at that down to our own events here that there are times, as John points out, where we actually don't want people to be streaming? We've got to be careful what access and how we're promoting it as an industry.
I think you've got to think about the relevance of these tools to particular events anyway. I think that the same evaluation that's happened with social media in general applies to these as well. And you might think that you want to jump on the bandwagon and use these because they're getting loads of PR exposure and these are the great new things. But actually, if you don't have an audience in that realm, then you're kind of utilizing something in the wrong context. So I think there's always been a risk once people have been able to kind of take control of media, which social media has kind of democratized more than we've ever seen before, that people might not turn up to your events, they might not pay a ticket, they might not leave their office, etc., etc. So I think you've got a responsibility, as always, to create fantastic content and to provide the tools for those audience members who are creating user-generated content to make it compelling and give people a reason to still turn up, or really, really maximize that horizon outside the live event by getting that fantastic reach and amplification and engagement beyond the live space.
Is the development of the live streaming within social media platforms being driven by the social media platforms themselves identifying events as a way of increasing their reach and their users, or have events engaged with social media platforms to say, we could do with live streaming? Who's driving who with this?
I think it would be kind of nice to think that social media platform owners and developers are waking up in the morning and thinking, oh, those event peeps do cool stuff. Let's create a whole new collection of tools for them to use specifically. I think it's much more about us as event people co-opting these tools and using them in the right ways, in the right contexts. Obviously, we've got this fantastic face-to-face engaging environment, and we can use these fantastic tools to extend that rather than the other way around, from my perspective.